Hey, everybody. Welcome to Coming and Going, a podcast designed to be a biblical guide to your parenting journey. My name is Joe Crabb, and I have the privilege and honor of being your host for this show, just navigating all sorts of different topics and conversations as we look to ultimately be good stewards of the gifts of God's grace that He has given us to our children. And so thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Just to give you a little heads up, this is part 2 of a multi-episode series in which we are having conversations about talking to our kids and students about sex and sexuality, and of course, helping them to grow and understand it from a biblical worldview, as well as providing some practical principles and tools for you as a parent as you navigate these conversations through the different phases of life. Because as we know, it should not just be the birds and the bees one-time talk, but it should be an ongoing conversation as your kids are growing through different phases, even beyond high school. So on the first episode, we talked with Pastor Jacob Lay about the theology of sex and the importance of us as parents understanding what God and the Bible say about it in that episode as well. Also got a little bit into some of just the practical aspects of the conversation in approaching it in a way that honors God and is helpful to your kids. But I'm excited for the second part as that builds off that first part, as we're going to be taking a look and understanding sort of the psychological sides of having these conversations, psychological side of sex itself, how it affects our kids through each of the development phases. And I'm grateful and blessed to have a great friend of the show and of Woodside, Liz Strong. So Liz, once again, I'm going to give you the bio, although this is at this point the second time you've been on the pod. I want to make sure that credit is due. And the first time I did this, did I get dialectical correct?
Yeah, that's it. You can say DBT also.
What's that?
You could just say DBT.
DBT. So people get the insider language there. But you already got a sneak peek of hearing from Liz, but Liz is a clinical social worker who's been practicing since 2009, working in the community mental health system in Wayne and Macomb counties. She predominantly works with children and families as those connected to the child welfare or foster care system, including infant mental health. She is trained in DPT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And when she's not counseling kids and families, she is teaching social work as a professor at Oakland University. She's also a wife to Jason and a mom to 2 beautiful little girls. So Liz, welcome back. Thank you for being with us here once again. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing just great. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you, Liz. This is great. Thank you so much for the perspective that you're going to bring. As I've shared already, this is a multi-episode. We started with Jacob Lay, who's also one of the hosts of another Woodside show, Everyday Theology, kind of talking about the theology of sex, providing that biblical foundation for the conversations we're having. We have this episode with you, which we've already talked about. And of course, parents, we're going to be having a couple other episodes in which we're looking to talk directly with parents who have kids in particular phases that kind of stretch over a span of time. So we can kind of talk a little bit more in the trenches with them who find themselves in it daily, navigating conversations like this. And so we know that we'll get some principle and practical things that can probably be applied to a lot of the difficult situations or topics, the conversations that can pop up as parents. But we're going to focus as much as we can on this particular topic as we continue on in this multi-episode series. And so, we get to start this one here. Liz, you're not only a professional, but you are also a parent. So tell me a little bit about what is one of your favorite things about being a parent.
I really just love being with my kids, like the opportunities when maybe we're not screaming and whining, but just those special moments where we're just hanging out together, like cuddling on the couch, and my kids just kind of like let their guards down and we just chat. I love seeing them grow into their own little like people. And I'm just so proud of them, and I'm proud of, everything that they are becoming.
Amen. Amen. I mean, just watching them through those different phases develop. My youngest is 14, 15 months or whatever at the time of this recording. And just those sweet moments where out of nowhere, she'll just lay her head down on top of you. You're like, oh, Hi there. Or she's starting to walk or whatever around, and when you get that little glimpse of, oh, there's that little human who's gonna just be toddling around here soon. So those phases of developments are so fun to watch and to drink in. And as we're talking about this conversation, why do you believe these discussions surrounding our topic today are so crucial for your child's development? Because we'd say, oh yeah, hey, it is crucial that your kid eats well and sleeps well and gets some physical activity and so on. But why are these conversations so important as well for that development?
Yeah, I mean, sex is a big part of life, you know? I mean, it may not be something that people are doing all the time, but it is a part of most people's experiences at some point in life. And, I think a lot of people in adulthood are recognizing that they've been really harmed by not being able to have open conversations as they grew up about sex and about their questions or about what's normal, what's not normal. And, long term, that can affect how we have healthy relationships, whether it's dating relationships or marriages. And so, the more that we can talk openly and lay a solid foundation for sex, I think it benefits us throughout our entire life. Being able to think about how we engage in these conversations. And then, obviously, another reason that it's so important to talk about this is because if you don't, who will? Right? TikTok? Friend? Um, I have a story about a friend who gave me some very bad information, and her name is Reve Wilson.
Oh.
In sixth grade, we were on the bus, and I asked her a question about something, and the other kids were talking about, and she didn't know, and so she gave me bad information, and for years, I just never knew what that thing was.
I really can't wait for people who listen to this to ask Reve. Reve is one of our hosts of the Everyday Theology show as well. So I'm going to let my producers know we can't cut this. We got to keep transparency for our audience. But well, you're right. Jacob and I talked a little bit about that in the last episode as well. Is that oftentimes you hinted at it? You didn't hint at it. You said it outright. We have there's an unwillingness at times or an avoidance at times to have some of these conversations because you're trying to preserve innocence. Yet in the attempt to preserve innocence, you might actually be working against that end because you're removing your voice from the conversation. Now, even having your voice proactively, we know doesn't mean that you're going to be able to address everything as it happens in the moment, because you can't really mark the date that your daughter's on the bus with another friend from church and they share misinformation, right? But you can create a proactive enough culture so that when that does happen, she's not left for years or decades on end with misinformation, but is able to say, hey, mom, I heard this. Can you help this? But it is such a difficult thing because, as we know, it's sex is a gift that has been given to us by God to be expressed in accordance to His word, and is also something that is often warned about because of the dangers of sexual sin. And so there is that weightiness to it, but there's also this beauty to it. And oftentimes people, talk about the same thing like with fire. Like, it's beautiful when it can be approached in a way that is useful to the design that it has, or it can be dangerous. And sometimes parents just don't know when to tend to that flame of conversation. And so um, I appreciate the way that you've spelt it out here, because it's so crucial for development, because it is a part of our lives and a part of how God has designed us. Now we know that design is being expressed through all sorts of different phases as kids are curious in different phases about different things when it comes to their bodies or even just about the world in general. So, how do children's questions and curiosity about sex change as they get older?
Yeah, I think, when they're younger, like preschool age, I mean, before preschool, they're probably not asking a ton of questions. Although they might ask questions about their own anatomy, right? Because that's a great time for self discovery. And so they might just ask some questions. Or if they're in a home with siblings, and they see, okay, why does my sibling have that? And I don't have that, right? So that's actually the beginning of conversations about sex, right? Talking about anatomy. But I think that like initially younger children tend to focus on something external, right? I see something, I don't understand it, and now I want to understand it. So I'm asking questions because I'm confused. But generally, it's about the external things. My friend's mom is pregnant. Like what's that about, right? And as they get older, the questions start to turn more internal or social, right? So I'm experiencing a feeling. What does that mean? What is this about? I have a crush on somebody. What does that mean? What does that look like? Right. And then eventually, like, man, my friend showed me a video the other day and like I didn't really understand what I was watching and it made me feel really uncomfortable. Like sometimes, unfortunately, those things happen, right? So I think that like we start to really question like, well, is that something I should be doing? Is that not something I should be doing? So we go in the early years to being more just curious about what we're seeing, to our later years to be having big questions about what we're feeling and experiencing like directly.
That's good. That's good. That's good. As soon as you brought up that first part there too about how they look at it physically or whatever, and the outside, the questions about anatomy and our family came up because we went to the beach and she wanted to know, why does her swimsuit have to cover different areas than her cousin's swimsuit, who's a boy, because it's not, that he can have his shirt off. And so but there it's just an, I can look at it, an innocent curiosity that is stemmed from how God has designed her and designed him. It provides conversation for us to say, oh, well, this is how God has distinctly made you and him. And this is why. Now, that's good stuff. You're like, well, you're just a girl. It's like, okay, then you have to have that little discernment. So, like, well, this is why. And there are key words that you can use and phrases that you can use to still help them honor the God's design and gain an understanding of, oh, this is a little bit different. So I we're talking through some of these key development areas, and you kind of started giving us some buckets of like, hey, this external, this internal, this processing. So what are some of those other key developmental phases, even if you want to go as practical as like age range to age range, or even stage of life, preschool to elementary or whatever, what are some of those key developmental phases when it comes to kids' understanding of sex and sexuality? Oh, and also, so real quick for the listeners, we're talking about sex and sexuality. This refers to sex, obviously, even being like male, female, how God has distinctly made us. So it's sex, gender, and sexuality, how it's being expressed, as a man, as a woman, and so just so we're like, well, what are the terms that we're using here? So yes, if you wouldn't mind, give us some of those key developmental phases. Thank you all for the quick director's note pause. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important, like at a really early age, like what we were talking about, just setting that foundation for openness and being willing to answer like questions that come up without like panicking or being too anxious or getting too flustered, especially if you're somebody who grew up in a home where sex wasn't talked about. This might be really difficult for you. But even in like that early childhood time, we really want to open the door to using correct language, right? Using the correct anatomical terms for our body parts or for others' body parts. And so we also want to, I think there's also some other important concepts that we can introduce at a really young age, like consent. Right. So we can talk about, we don't like put our hands on somebody else unless we ask them for permission first. Can I give you a hug? Can I give you a high five? We want to ask first. And when we lay that foundation, it makes it much easier to talk about these concepts more in depth later on as they come up. So that's like kind of early childhood is really just setting the stage.
So
And remember,
foundational language and
yes,
concepts to
yep,
build off for future conversations. That's good.
absolutely. And then like being willing to talk about things, I think in an honest, age appropriate way. So for instance, my sister-in-law was pregnant and my daughter was 4 at the time. And she had a lot of questions about, well, how did the baby get there? And then how did it get there? Like, how did that happen? I had that opportunity to either go, well, the stork, right? I could say something like that, right? Or I could answer honestly and directly while also keeping it age appropriate. So I believe when I answered that question, I said, well, and this is really up to your comfort level, but this is exactly what I said. I said, well, when a mommy and a daddy have sex with each other, then sometimes they make a baby. And that's what happened. And so I wanted to use that language because that is the truth. Um, Now, if she was to ask me what is sex, I probably would have said something along the lines of, well, I think that's a big question that I would love to talk more about with you as you get older. It's not really something easy for your age to understand. So even not being afraid to like put that boundary in place, I don't know if that's really an answer I can give you right now. But I hear you and I want you to know that I will answer that when you're ready for me to answer that. So that's kind of that early childhood or, early even elementary age. I think as we get into that later elementary time, that is when that like brain development really starts kicking in, as they start to kind of extinguish childhood and they start to get themselves ready for puberty. So that fourth, fifth grade time can be a really interesting time. Um, and so that's also sometimes where kids start using language like, oh, I have a boyfriend, I have a girlfriend. Are they really dating? I mean, to them, yes. To us, like, okay, cool, right? But they start to become more aware of, like, oh, I've got a feeling about somebody, and even being aware of that type of language. Like, as your kids are talking about crushes, boyfriends, girlfriends, it's not abnormal for your kids to talk about those things. But I think we also want to open the door to like asking more questions. Oh, and you say you have a crush on that person. What does that mean? What does that look like for you? Right? Those open-ended conversations. In that like fourth, fifth grade time, that's really important.
What are some other in that 4th, 5th grade time too, that's oftentimes, like, let's say, I know in public schools, might even be true in private schools, this is where you're starting to potentially get your first introduction of sex education or, health class, obviously talking about puberty, those kind of changes. What are some potential topics like, yeah, hey, these are also makes their because they are going through a lot of you just kinda relational changes. "Oh, I am liking this person. I am dating them, whatever." But obviously, we know from the sex part, the gender part, they're also going to begin going through some physical changes. So, any other topics to say, hey, here's some things to keep on the old punch list of ongoing conversations with your kid in that season? Yeah.
Certainly at that time, I think especially for girls, that's that can potentially be when they begin their menstrual cycles. And so being aware of like changes that they're going through in their body, obviously that can change like their emotional state. I notice when I'm working with that age range, parents will be like, I don't know, out of nowhere, she's just like acting like not herself. And I'm like, mm, well, you know, her body's getting ready, right? And I think it's even important to talk to your boys about that to some extent, to what you feel comfortable. Because they like if their friends that are girls are all of a sudden acting kind of funny, like you can be like, oh, let me explain the miracle of puberty and our body. Changing." And being able to talk about and prepping your kids for what puberty can feel like, what it can look like, what it is, maybe prepping your own selves for what's coming, because middle school is a tough time for a lot of kids. Um, and actually moving into that middle school phase, thinking about like when you think about your child as a like little teeny tiny baby, right? That 0 to 3 month time frame. Their brains are going through the most extreme, intense developmental changes that you will go through in your entire life, except for puberty.
And there it
Isn't that
is.
fun? So if you're like,
Yeah.
are really squirrely, right? They are because their brains are literally on fire.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
as they prep from, childhood and they're prepping, not that they are anywhere near being adults, but they are prepping to become adults. And it takes like around 10 or so years for them to physically I know it is truly wild. Um, so in middle school, they're more independent. They might have more access, whether you are monitoring things or not, their friends' parents may not be. And so this is a time when they might be exposed to more information about like sexual topics. Once again, you could do the greatest job ever at like locking that stuff down, keeping them away from social media, but some of their friends' parents may not be doing that. Um, and so being mindful that your kids may have access to at least hearing about different things, potentially even seeing different things, you may want to think about addressing what they could be hearing and seeing before a friend shows them something or before they are scrolling on TikTok or Snapchat on like the For You thing, and like getting information that they're not ready for.
Yeah, that's good. So this is, I think, going back because we kind of have this next phase a little bit here too with high school as well. But just there, like we have the foundational stuff where we're using plain language. I think even coupling that with what we talked about in the last episode with what Jacob had shared in regards to the biblical worldview, because then we're bringing it back. Here's our baseline. Here's what this is. Here's why we believe what we believe, as well as we're gonna talk about it. Like you said, oh, this is how a baby was made. Right? It was appropriate answer. It's not giving too much information, but you're cultivating a safe environment for conversation to be able to occur because words like sex and sometimes even just like I could feel the audience when you're saying, and this is what I told them. I'm like, uh-oh, there's what, and sometimes just getting over that lump in your throat of saying the word sex to your kid is like all it takes, like, oh, okay. Or like you said, using an anatomically correct term, be like, okay, I just said that to my child. It's like, yeah, because it's going to come up in conversation again, or you should want it to, in the sense of you should want to be able to have conversations. Oh, hey, you're getting ready to enter puberty. And in this time, your body is going to go through these different changes, like in these different ways. And so, same thing. Now we're shifting into middle school, and there's some potential greater exposure and greater interest because more people are talking about these things and so on. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, now let's go back to the baseline words and language that we use and the baseline biblical worldview, especially when it comes to sex and sexuality. And people might be saying, like, oh, well, yeah, I'm a boy and I like boys. Like, okay, now you have a middle school student who's going through the same physiological or mental changes that a 3-month-old was going through. And what tools and foundation have you provided for them? And what space have you created for them to be able to have conversations with you in the home about, like, okay, well, then how do you respond as a follower of Jesus Christ? What is it that we believe here? How do I help you navigate this conversation? And on down the line, being exposed to a video or being feeling like even a pressure from like, hey, I do have this boy that I hope asked me to homecoming, but what if he tries to kiss me? Like, so this got good foundation to kind of even some different ways that kind of full circle how it internally expresses itself, and now potentially externally expressing itself as in this last phase of kind of high school and beyond, they might begin being in a dating relationship or look to their first dating relationship. So anything else to hit on there in that last phase that we move from middle school to high school?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely high school is I call it it's the first time they have an independent relationship. It doesn't mean fully independent of their parents. Obviously, your teenagers are still living at home with you, and you still have the opportunity to set certain rules and expectations with them. But your teenagers are often at some point are driving, or their friends are driving, or their boyfriends or girlfriends are driving. And so, if you have never talked about this stuff with your kid, what I like to say about teenagers is if there's a will, there's a way, right? Like they don't need to be alone in a house overnight for the weekend, right? They can find the spaces and times to be alone together. And sometimes they seem pretty innocuous to you as a parent, right? Oh, her boyfriend's just driving her home from school. Sometimes we need to be aware of that. And if we've never set our child up to think about what do they want, right? What are their long term goals? Like, do you really want to save your virginity for marriage, right? Like, and actually having your child think through that, is that important to you, right? And if it's not, why not? And if it is, why? Right? And helping them to think about it because at the end of the day, they might be faced with situations where they have to make a decision and you will not be around, especially in those high school years. And we want to make sure that they know, even like, who do I want to love? Right? Like, love is an important part when we talk about sex and thinking about, yeah, what type of person do I want to even date? And like, how do I know what those green flags, those beige flags, or those red flags are? Right? And how do I differentiate and really start to pick up on people who will respect my boundaries and people who might push my boundaries? Um, I really think the best thing you can do with your middle schoolers and high schoolers is pick an errand that's about 30 or so minutes away. You and your child get in that car, nobody else, just the two of you, because this kind of conversation is going to go a lot better than this kind of conversation. When kids can see your eyeballs, they get really uncomfortable. When you can see your kids' eyeballs, you might get really uncomfortable too. So it actually sets the stage for both of you to have those conversations, ask questions, but I don't have to look at you in the eye and see your reaction to what I'm asking. Or I don't have to look at you in the eye and see your reaction to what I am saying right now as the parent. I feel really fortunate because when I was going to my high school youth group, my church was about 45 minutes away, and my mom and I would drive to church on Wednesday nights. And so on those car rides, at times, those types of questions would come up. And I knew my mom would always answer them without judgment. She would give that biblical worldview. She would answer my questions honestly. And therefore, I didn't need to search those answers out in any type of wrong space or wrong person who's giving bad information.
That's good. That's really good. That's a great piece of just practical advice right there. Yes. Hit the road, eyes for it. Sometimes that's the best way to have that conversation. And again, it just might be a catalyst to more conversations that occur. And Liz, I love the things that you just dropped there in that last one because what we did is we moved it beyond just kind of like informational to both like aspirational, like, well, and or more value based, right? Like, what is the value that you want your child to have when it comes to engaging in other relationships? What are the values that they're looking for with somebody that they might engage in relationships? And that it's not just when it comes to the expression of sexuality, just like I have all these hormones and I want to do something with them. It's, oh no, actually, I think I might love that person and I want to express my love in this physical way. It's like, oh, okay. Well, have you ever had the conversation with your kid about sex and how it honoring God by having sex with your husband, your wife, and embracing God's design in that respect? And so I think giving that again that foundational view from the beginning and building off of it so that way when they do get to the point of like, oh yes, I have all of these stirred up beehive feelings that are going on right now, what is the good of them, what is the purpose of them, and what can they potentially lead them to as we look to hopefully see them glorify and honor God and make those decisions, especially the decisions when you as a parent are not immediately around. um, so this is it's so good, so good. So Liz, as we get ready to kind of wrap up this formal part of the conversation, I've been super encouraged. I think it's been a great connection point to this first episode in this series. But what other words of advice would you have for parents who may feel uncomfortable, uncertain about discussing these topics, and how they can help kind of create a safe space for their kids to ask questions or express concerns?
Yeah, I think if you have any discomfort talking about this, like as a parent, you are there to guide your child, right? Like when we think about the word discipline, it means to teach, right? It comes from the Latin to teach. And that's our job as parents is to discipline our children. And I don't mean punishment, but to teach them, right? And to give them the tools that they need. But sometimes we need to work on our own feelings and our own discomfort. So I would really encourage you, if that is an uncomfortable area for you, practice, right? With your spouse, with maybe a close friend that you feel comfortable with. Like practice saying those anatomical terms. Practice saying different concepts or different activities that children might engage in. Practice talking about what they might be seeing. If you feel a discomfort, your kids will pick up on that. So we want to try to, as best as possible, get ourselves comfortable so that we can be that safe space. If they feel as though we're really anxious and tense and we're like getting irritable when they ask certain questions, they're going to stop asking. And so we need to do our own work sometimes so that we can be that safe haven for them so that they're not seeking out other resources that we haven't given guidance on. I would also encourage parents, find some resources that might resonate with your kids. That might require you going on Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, wherever they might find their information. But find the TikToks that you agree with. Find the TikToks that like align with your values because your kids might be like more open to watching that. That's their world, whether they're allowed to watch TikTok or not. Uh,
But there
yeah,
are aspects of it which it's like we know. I mean, we put content out on those platforms, right? We have an Instagram reel of certain stuff. It's like there is sound content on some of those platforms, but that might resonate with them.
there's some very good stuff on TikTok. There's also some very terrible stuff on
Yeah,
TikTok.
just
Um,
like
well,
just like TV and magazine articles and
exactly,
everything else down the
exactly.
line. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, finding the information that resonates with your kid, meet them where they're at. Rather than like being like, here's a book that I read. Okay, your kid's not going to read a book. I'm going to be honest, unless they're, what I mean? Like most kids are not going to read a book. They already read too much in school. They don't want to read like a nonfiction book outside of school. Most kids don't, at least. And I think the other thing that you can do just to help with that comfort, like think through even this episode, those different life stages. Maybe you and your spouse, you and another family member, you and a friend, write some scripts for yourself. Come up with some language, right? Have it on your phone. So when your kid like comes up with a question, if you're like, I don't know how to answer this, right? You just pull your phone up and be like, okay, so
Yes. Yeah.
I need
Yeah.
to
You've prepped
use
for
that.
this.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely.
That's really good. That is really good. Yeah, even just having some quick reminders, some quick talking points, so quick references to scripture. Um, when we talked about the episode regarding trauma, we also talked about, hey, for some, part of the difficulty can feel like, oh, I've never began these conversations. And you guys are even talking about having a conversation like this with your 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, or I feel like I've messed up in these conversations. Okay, you can always apologize. You can always own that. Let's say you're even late into it. Just even say, like, if you're like getting ready to, hey, me and my son, we're going to go to Cedar Point with each other and we're going to have a long ride there, a long ride back. And I'm going to get ready to like, kind of have this talk with him. Just even say, like, hey, I apologize that this hasn't happened sooner or as often. I want to have this because I know that God has designed you like this and it's a good design, and share all the beauty of what God's word says about sex and sexuality. I also know that you may have already know a lot of this, and I'm not going to act ignorant like you haven't been influenced by things, but I do want to create a space in which you can ask those questions. And so thanks for being patient with me. I just want you to know that regardless, like, I love you. I'm here for you. I want to have these conversations. Like, it sometimes that could be the stalemate that stops us. This feeling like, I didn't hop in a couple of stops ago. I wasn't there when they were 4 and they asked about, why is my cousin's bathing suit different than me? It's like, that's okay. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge who you are in their life, the good of the conversation, and just continue to pray. Continue to pray through all of it. That will ultimately that will be the good fruit that's produced as you're trying to have these conversations with your kids. And so, uh, Liz, this has been so great, so helpful. Thank you so much for your time, for your insight. Again, parents, for those who are listening, if there's any way that we can be of help to you as you're navigating these conversations, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's again the beauty of the body of Christ and the beauty of creating content like this is that we are here just to be an encouragement to you, to be a resource to you, to learn from you as well. So perhaps there's a portion of this conversation that you feel like we need to dive in a little bit more, or you've got some great resources that you'd love for us to kind of take a look at and perhaps help get out there into the hands of others as they're looking to be good stewards of these conversations. So whatever it might be, just an invitation for you to know that we're here to keep these conversations going, that we love you, we're praying for you, and we are here for you as you are coming and going.